we've seen real disasters. This is something we can avoid. This is something that we can take care of ourselves without depending on anyone else.
That's almost like a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. And it might buy us a couple of days, but if this goes into effect and lasts who knows how long, that's not going to get us out of this problem that we are currently facing.
SNAP benefits playing out here in South Carolina's political parties all week. The governor activating the 1SC fund to help finance food banks will help more than 500,000 people affected when the SNAP program ran dry Saturday due to the government shutdown. But right now, a ruling by 2 federal judges is hanging over this situation. It directs the Trump administration to tap billions of dollars in emergency funds to partially cover that food stamp program in the month of November. The court giving the White House until Monday, tomorrow, to respond with a plan. So that is where we begin this week. It has been the story of the week. The battle over SNAP benefits in every single state, including South Carolina. You got 500,000 people that have them here in the Palmetto State. We go to the Capitol, where Dave Wilson and Catherine Glenn Foster are right now. We never, well, I guess we probably did assume this might end up in the courts, and that's where it is right now. So what do we think?
There are a lot of factors at play here, Brian. First of all, as you noted, 2 federal judges in Massachusetts and Rhode Island have directed the Trump administration to come up with a plan by tomorrow, November 3rd, after those SNAP food stamp benefits expired and were cut off November 1st, just yesterday. We are waiting, obviously, for that to play itself out. But here in South Carolina, or I guess right now they're in South Carolina, we have more than 260,000 families who are relying on these benefits, more than 42 million families nationwide. And so it impacts every single community. Every month in South Carolina, it costs $104 million just to administer this program. And so as we look at these numbers, as we look at the fact that USDA, who administers the program, has the funds to do this, there are Democrats in the State House who are calling on the governor to call a state of emergency, as we've seen here in Virginia and Louisiana, in order to redirect some of the existing funds, because we have our governor saying, okay, we're gonna activate this charitable drive, essentially. And we can have a whole other conversation about the role of corporate America when it comes to situations like this. But this is a role that the government has taken on, a responsibility that falls to them, because no child in America should go hungry. And it really is a government function to ensure that that happens, even without the charitable intentions of corporate and private Americans.
If you get up this Sunday morning and you go to the refrigerator and you have milk and you have bread and you can make some eggs, that's wonderful. But there are 260,000 families that are probably not going to be able to do that by the end of the weekend, the first of the week. Catherine, it's really politics, though, that are at play right now here in Washington. And we're in Washington right now, in the nation's capital, where the gridlock is still going on. We're still seeing negotiations happening. And this has been one of those blocks of the negotiation that Republicans and Democrats have been using. And it's a ploy that you don't really want to have, Brian, because when you are doing that, this is unfortunately where we see the ripple effects of a lack of planning on the nation's leadership's part to bring us to the point where we're having a continuing resolution. The thing that we're also facing, though, is this continuing resolution is getting ready to hit the wall of another planned continuing resolution here in the month of November. So you pair that with Obamacare and the rising cost of health care. SNAP is just the beginning. You got these different fronts of issues that are coming together, and it's going to be like a political tornado when those things begin to hit. And we're seeing that starting this weekend.
Yeah,
that's right. So right now what we have is the Democrats and the Republicans playing chicken in essence, with people's lives, with children's lives in particular. And again, this is not something where we should be willing to put this kind of human issue, this kind of need on the line just because we don't want something else to happen. You know, we all kind of understand that in politics you give and you take, and you may agree to something in order to get something else, and it's all part of the game sometimes of politics. But there are real world consequences, and sometimes those consequences go too far, and this is one of those issues.
And Brian, somebody had said earlier in the week, why doesn't the governor just call a special session?
Yeah, they're still saying it up until Friday even.
Right. So one of the reasons for the governor not to call a special is because he can do so. The legislature, as we've talked about before, when sine die happens, that is the resolution that says, okay, we're done for now. We're not going to do anything else except for anything specific. So the only way for the legislature to come back in is for the governor to call them in for a very specific purpose. What we're hearing, though, here in Washington is that there are folks within the Trump administration who are saying, don't play that card yet, because if you do, you're going to end up messing up the hand that we're trying to play to negotiate what needs to be done for the continuing resolution. And that's just not a place that you play when it comes to food for families.
No.
That's exactly where we are. And similarly, at the federal level, there are other issues at play that the Trump administration, again, is not wanting to be put on the table. So they're encouraging the lawmakers, encouraging Congress not to come back to be able to do anything on this for their own reasons.
And that's the reason why we now have a judge who has now come in, because
2 judges.
right. So you've got the balance of power, the distribution of power here in America, and a checks and balances system. So you've got Congress that hasn't done anything yet. You've got a president who hasn't done anything yet. Thus the reason why that third branch of government, the judiciary, is stepping in to say something has to be done. We're going to require you to do it.
Right. And one of those judges, I believe there was the Massachusetts judge, specifically said that if this program isn't reinstated immediately, that the consequences are going to be devastating. We're talking about children going hungry. We're talking about children who are unable to fill their bellies in the morning or at night. It is simply unacceptable in a nation as developed, as wealthy as we are, to let children go hungry because we're up in the Capitol playing politics.
So here's the number that is to keep in mind, and we've used this kind of figure before. 1 in 9 families in America is on SNAP. Now, we've used that same thing when we're talking about voter turnout. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But think about this. In your neighborhood, you've got food, your neighbor next door, but one of the neighbors in your block doesn't have food this weekend. That's what we're talking about. So there are these calls to say, well, then we need to get the community stepping in on that. Well, the community gets some of their support, like you have in town, Harvest Hope Food Bank, and you've got other food banks across the state who are trying to provide that. But those are also receiving funds, not just local charity.
Right. And we also need to recognize that we don't always know who among our communities, who among our neighbors is receiving SNAP benefits, because we don't always know what's going on behind the scenes, what may have happened with someone's job or employment or other positions, what's happening in their families. So even though this is a federal government responsibility, this is something that the government needs to, and 2 judges have now said the government must step in and resolve this immediately. Nonetheless, we are a charitable nation, and so we should be also stepping out for our neighbors, keeping an eye on each other, reaching out, building bridges, checking in on each other, and donating to food banks and to other local community charities. Yep. When you do that, just make sure that you check with them. There's all these lists out there of what specifically is helpful. Things like boxed milk, for example, super helpful. Other like packaged rices, maybe a little bit less helpful. helpful because they get so much of that, and it's wonderful. But just check in with them on what specific needs they may have.
Yeah, those food banks, we checked in with them throughout the week. They were already facing quite a struggle as it is. This is only going to put an additional burden on them, so they're going to leverage every resource they have to help people as we get into the month of November here and the holidays. Critical issue. We'll see what the Trump White House comes up with that response on Monday. When we come back, though, we're going to talk about a guy that's a friend of this program who made it official. Germaine Johnson is in the race for governor. We're going to hear from him when he comes back and talk about the race.
So today I stand before you with humility and conviction and what I like to call fearless faith. Fearless faith.
Fearless faith. That's what Representative Germaine Johnson, the Richland County Democrat, says is driving him to officially jump in to the race for governor. We had Germaine here on the program Connect to the Capitol just a few weeks ago, and he all but announced that he would be joining the race. Well, now he has. This was just a few days ago at the State House. Just the second Democrat to join the race. He'll be, as of now, competing for the Democratic nomination in 2026 against Charleston attorney Mullins McLeod, and we've said enough about him as well. So today, we're going to talk about Mr. Johnson. We knew this was coming. He's been on this show a couple times in the last few months. Always great discussions. He's a likable guy.
He sure is. He has been on, as you said, a couple of times, and is just such a connector. He's someone who, even though he's a proud Democrat, he reaches across the aisle, and he really is all about working with people, serving people, his constituents, no matter who they are. And it reminds me of what is on his campaign website, where it says he's rooted in South Carolina and service, a different kind of Democrat who's a deacon, a gun owner, and a political outsider. So he's someone who can talk about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, but also reshape the narrative a bit. Because for a lot of people, a lot of folks in South Carolina and across the nation, some people hear DEI and it strikes fear into some hearts, right? And they say, well, that sounds, scary. It sounds like, maybe some people might be even disadvantaged by that. And so Germaine Johnson, he brings in this perspective where he reframes that narrative, and he says, well, think about all the different people who it's going to impact, people who you may not even be thinking about, like veterans, for example. And so when he gets up to speak on an issue, first of all, he's going to have done his research. He's going to bring a different perspective, and he's going to educate you. It really brings into play how he's a deacon, and so he just always brings that new perspective that's so valuable.
Well, it's interesting, too. You used the phrase a moment ago, he reaches across the aisle. He'll actually tell you he doesn't reach across the aisle. He goes across the aisle. And that is one of those things when you find somebody who has that level of personality, determination. I mean, to go back and if you have not had a chance to see the interview that we did with Germaine Johnson, there's a Connect to the Capitol Extra. It's a good 15, 20-minute conversation that we had with him. And it would be good for you there at home to hear it, to see it, get a little better understanding, because we try to do this with every single one of these gubernatorial candidates and folks who are running for statewide office, because we want you to know who they are, why they're important, what they're actually trying to say beyond 30-second sound bites. With Germaine Johnson, you have somebody who has a really, truly rag to riches story. Let's be real frank, though. Do we have a South Carolina with a complexion now that could get people to cross the aisle and cross party lines and cross racial lines to elect an African-American man as governor of South Carolina? That's a question that is going to eventually begin to play itself out, because if there's anybody who has had an ability to really go across the aisle, it's been Germaine Johnson in the South Carolina House.
That's right. For me, it really is, it's MLK-esque, it's Obama-esque, it's I have a dream. And it's about believing in a South Carolina where it is possible. It's about believing in a South Carolina where the color of someone's skin doesn't matter, where it's more about policy over party. And if you have someone who goes across the aisle, someone who's going to get the job done and is going to represent every single one of us, whether we vote for him or not, every single one of us to the absolute best of his ability, then that's the kind of person that we need as governor. No matter whether it's an R or a D or something else behind their name, no matter what the color of their skin is, this is someone who, from my perspective, has that rags to riches story, can identify with so many different South Carolinians, has walked in our shoes.
And so it's really going to boil down to whether or not he can, in the race, in going out and meeting with folks, can he bring over a group of Republican voters, your typical conservatives, who can recognize where he is on issues and maybe recognize that he does reflect a lot of their same values, because we're a very red state. It's going to be interesting when you see, because we're going to talk about in the next segment, another person who's running for governor. Will there be able to be, should he win the nomination in June, an ability for him to start pulling people across?
And that's something that we talked about the last time he was on the program, right? We talked about his ability to connect with and bring alongside a lot of these Republican voters who said, you know, I may have never voted for a Democrat before, but you were the kind of Democrat I can get behind. I trust you. I know that I can rely on you to get the job done.
And I think that's really, Brian, what a lot of folks are looking for right now. What are we going to do to find the person who can continue to lead the state of South Carolina, continue to work on the economic development, but also focus on the issues that are at home? And that's going to be interesting. Now, there is the whisper that he already kind of knows who his running mate's going to be. I don't know that I've heard a few names, but it's going to be interesting because I think he's playing chess in this particular race right now. He's not playing checkers. I mean, it's like, I'm going to wait for the right time to announce who my running mate's going to be. I wouldn't doubt that it's female. I wouldn't doubt it's a very strong member of the legislative body. So we'll have to see where that goes.
We will. Well, coming up next, we're talking law and order. And again, another candidate for governor, the Attorney General, announcing a reform package he wants lawmakers to take on in January. That's when we come back on Connected to the Capitol.
These are some of the reforms that we are going to push. This is my last legislative session as Attorney General. And so these are things that I'm very passionate about. These are things that I think South Carolina families deserved to have implemented or codified or pursued.
Wilson proposing a very big overhaul of the criminal justice system the other day, some calling it the most aggressive in about 100 years. No bail, he says, for violent or repeat offenders. No cashless bail. Human trafficking, child exploitation laws, another part of this. And mandatory minimum sentences of 25 years for first-degree child exploitation crimes. These have been hallmarks of his time in the Attorney General's office. Internet crimes against children, human trafficking. And now, of course, we've got to talk about the bail issue, too, because that's a problem in South Carolina.
Well, it's interesting that he said that this is his last legislative agenda as Attorney General.
Correct.
What he's really saying is, this is my last as Attorney General, and I sure hope that it's going to make it my entree to my next legislative agenda as governor of South Carolina. That is exactly what he's doing. It's the same kind of playbook that we saw when Henry McMaster was Attorney General. The Attorney General has that lead prosecutor responsibility. I mean, the head of the law enforcement in the state of South Carolina. And it is no wonder that you're seeing Alan Wilson come out with a very strong pro-law enforcement agenda to try to woo in Republican voters. Keep in mind, we talked about this several weeks ago, Catherine. There was a whole list of sheriffs and, 46 county sheriffs. There were a good many of those sheriffs that were on his list of supporters just a few weeks ago. So this is just like one more step that Alan Wilson's taking.
It really is a clear part of his platform. Alan Wilson has taken his time as Attorney General and everything that he's learned in that position, everything that he's seen through these years, and is bundling it up into, or a lot of it anyway, into this legislative package. A lot of those things, those hallmarks of his administration as Attorney General, those things he's been known for, being especially tough on crime against children, sex trafficking, a lot of these problems where it just cuts deep. And so he's looking at how do you fix some of these problems. And some of them are before sentencing, these things like bail and making sure that if you're a repeat violent offender that, let's keep you in jail until your trial. Maybe you're innocent, but just in case, we don't want to put someone back out on the streets and then have them commit another violent crime, then that's, it's a step too far.
It's interesting because let's just peel the onion back a little bit here, because this is his counter to Nancy Mace's constant, where's Alan Wilson? Where's Alan Wilson?
Right here.
Right here. And this is the where they're starting to draw out their battle lines. This is where I'm going to be. This is where I'm going to be. And
this is what I'm actually getting done.
Right. And that's what we're going to be watching kind of shift through and move across back and forth over the next several weeks and months until we get really into the first of the year, because it's going to be in the first of the year that the real kind of battle lines of where am I, who am I going after as a person who's running for governor of South Carolina, what constituency am I really looking for as we move closer and closer to that June primary.
Yeah, it'll be here before we know it. So another stay tuned for Alan Wilson. Like you said, final agenda as AG, but he wants it to be his first as governor. We'll see about that. And of course, that all has to do with the power of the vote, who becomes the next governor. We're talking about the vote. Coming up when we wrap things up on Connect to the Capitol, we have some city and town and county level elections. That's where the rubber meets the road, my friends. That's what they always tell us, all local politics. That's the most important. We're going to talk about that when we come back. All right, we're wrapping things up on Connect to the Capitol. It is time to vote. Municipal level elections. A lot of cities and towns in South Carolina, they have them. Coming up on Tuesday, the capital city, Columbia, has the mayor's race in play, a couple council seats. Some of the surrounding communities, Lexington, Irmo, Chapin, also have some as well here in the Midlands. Let's talk about this. It is important. The local level bodies of government. So important. Everyone talks about president, but this is where it really happens.
As we so often say, it really is the local level that impacts us the most. And yet too often, folks don't even show up for their local elections, much less know who ended up getting voted into office.
This is the government that's closest to you, has the biggest impact on your wallet. When you think about your school board, when you think about the city taxes that you pay, what you pay in your water price if you live in or outside of the city limits of Columbia. These are the sort of things where local elections really do matter. But the average voter turnout is less than 10%. Thus far, according to tallies, now keep in mind this, not every city's got an election right now, but there was only about 17,800 people who had voted in early voting thus far. The polls open on Tuesday morning, 7 to 7. If you live in an area and you don't know whether or not you're going to be voting, go to scvotes.gov. You can put in your name, your birth date, maybe the last 4 of your social, and it will show you your ballot. So please take the time to do that this Sunday and be prepared to head to the polls on Tuesday morning. You have to do it. We did an extensive story on this on early voting on Friday here at Watch Fox News. And again, disappointing numbers, like you said, but not every town has an election here coming up. But do what Dave said. Check out that website and make sure you have a ballot to vote on. And if you do, get to the polls, 7 a.m. So that's going to do it for Connect to the Capitol. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Catherine. And thank all of you for watching. Get out there and vote, and we will see you next Sunday on Connect to the Capitol.